In this video, I will explain how to submit flights for processing using the Advocate Consulting online flight log tool, and I will demonstrate ways that you can clear errors and warnings that arise during the log submission process. Log submission starts either on the aircraft screen or on the flight log screen by clicking the Submit Log Period button. My last period, which is closed and submitted, was for 2022, and now I will create a new log period for the calendar year 2023. I create the log period, and then to submit the log, I click on the open log period that I just created. I am now in the Mark Final stage. If you still have some flight logs in draft status, you just confirm here that they are now final before they can be submitted. Just click this button here, Mark All Final. Now that all of my flights have been marked final, I'm taken to the Warnings and Errors screen. Here the flight log tool has gone through all the flights and identified those flights that have issues that need to be brought to the user's attention. There are two types of issues that the flight log tool recognizes. There are warnings that the user needs to at least take a look at. It might pose a problem, it might not, and you have the ability to fix or ignore the warnings. And then there are errors. You don't have the ability to ignore an error if one is present, because an error is going to block us from being able to process your logs. So they must be fixed before the flight logs can submit. Starting at the first flight on the list on September 28th, I have an error that this flight still has one TBD in a field that we need, and then it tells you how to fix the problem. Go to Edit, Edit Flight, Primary Purpose. So I click Edit, Edit Flight, and I add a flight purpose. My records show that this was a business flight. Then click Continue Log Submission. This takes us back to the Errors and Warnings screen. Because we resolved the problem on the September 28th flight, that flight has now disappeared. On September 27th, this flight, coded business, has no passengers. This might be right, but deserves a second look, because 0 passengers is usually reserved for training, maintenance, and deadhead. I look in my records, and this was in fact a business flight, and it had a passenger who I forgot to add to the flight, so I will edit the flight. Note that on this screen, you can also see the warning here. After I add the passenger and save, the warning has now disappeared, and when I continue log submission, the September 27th flight has disappeared from here as well. On September 7th, I have this warning. Personal guest passengers are typically on board for reasons other than business, so when they are coded business, it may be correct, but deserves a second look. And then I see that this affects Diane Smith, who I know was on board for business. So for this one, I can click Ignore. It affects both flights going to and returning from the business event, so I will ignore it on this flight as well. On May 12th, I have two warnings. The flight primary purpose is not entertainment, but the description contains entertainment-related words. This might be right, but deserves a second look. The word in question is vacation. Also, the flight purpose of this flight is business, but none of the passengers have this same coding. This is likely an error. From these two warnings, it seems pretty clear that I have coded this flight incorrectly. My records show that this flight was for a vacation. When I click Edit, I see that I noted it as a vacation and all my passengers are coded as personal entertainment. This flight purpose also needs to be personal entertainment. And that resolves both warnings. So when I click Continue Log Submission, this May 12 flight is now gone. On April 20th, I have another error. Passenger Jane Doe's purpose is incidental, but they are not on board the next flight. Since this flight had an incidental stop for Jane, she's expected to be on the next flight. When I look at the flight, I see that Jane Doe is in fact a passenger, and her stop was incidental. But the problem is that she wasn't on the next flight. So instead of making an edit here, I will go to the next flight. And we see that she is indeed not on this flight. So I will add her here, and then continue log submission. Now, on April 18th, I have a warning that the previous flight landed at Los Angeles International Airport, but this flight took off from Sacramento. This generally means that there are flights that are out of order, there's a missing flight, or an airport code is incorrect. You can see we have 3 other warnings that are similar to this one, and I'm going to show you how to resolve these. But first I'm going to fix this error. This flight still has one TBD in a field that we need. I need to go to Edit, John Smith, and enter his activity at stop. So Edit, John Smith, and his activity at the stop was business, so I enter that. Save, and then continue log submission. What I have left are situations where the plane is landing at one airport, but taking off from another. Usually, when I click the Edit button, it takes me to the flight screen, where I can edit the flight or the passengers. But with this issue, it is easier to see the problem if I see the flight logs. So when I click Edit, it takes me to view the flight logs. You can see that the icons showing the warnings that were present in the errors and warnings screen are also present here. And the flight log tool highlights the airports which are a problem. You can clearly see that the plane landed in Sacramento, but took off from LA in its very next flight. And here it landed in LA, but took off from Sacramento in its very next flight. These mismatches don't make sense. As mentioned in the warning message, this is usually resolved by reordering the flights, adding one or more missing flights, or correcting an airport code. In this case, we can resolve the issue by noticing that there were 2 flights on March 14th, and that those flights were simply entered out of order. We can just click this arrow to reorder these 2 flights. Now you can see that the warnings went away, and there are no more mismatches between the arrival airports and the departure airports. Now that the final error is resolved, I can go back to the submission process, and we are immediately taken to the final step, and that is to show that the state of all the flights has now been changed to submitted. Advocate will now be alerted that the flights have been submitted for processing. I can click Done and return to the aircraft screen. If I go back to the log submission page, you can now see that the log period I just submitted is now closed. As always, if you have any issues, please let us know and we'll be happy to help.